Welcome, everybody. I am Rita McGrath, and welcome to the Rita McGrath Thought Sparks podcast. My guest this week is my good friend, my longtime colleague, my counterpart over at Wharton, Lori Rosenkopf, who is the, let me just make sure I get the title right, the Simon and Midge Pally Professor of Management, Vice Dean for Entrepreneurship, and I'm associated right now with the Venture Lab, which is what the organization I was part of Wharton years ago is now doing, the Wharton Entrepreneurship. We're going to talk about her new book, which is just coming out. It's called Unstoppable Entrepreneurs, about the program she's running at Venture Labs. And so welcome, Lori. It's a pleasure to have you.
Rita, it's so great to be here with you. We go back a long way, and it feels like a full circle moment.
It does, doesn't it? So for those of you who don't know, so I did my PhD at the Wharton School in the entrepreneurial program, and my thesis advisor was a guy named Ian McMillan, who was running that program. And Lori, meanwhile, was doing her PhD at Columbia, and among her many mentors was Michael Tushman, who's a professor of innovation and entrepreneurship and many other things. And so both of us ended up serendipitously on the job market the same year. And that was the year, I don't know if you remember, Lori, but Ranjay Gulati swept the entire job market that year. Like every single school had an offer out to him. And he finally had to pick one because at that time, and I think we haven't even cracked this yet, it was impossible to be multi-embodied in multiple places. So after he made his choice, all the other schools then moved, and Lori came over to Wharton, and I came over to Columbia. So we had swapped places. And both of us have been there ever since.
Kind of remarkable these days to be lifers.
It is, right?
It
is. So let's start with the book. And one of the things I love about this book, so the book is called Unstoppable Entrepreneurs. It's published by the Wharton Business School Press. It's a very easy to read book and full of just little nuggets and stories. And it's really, really a lovely read. So when we say entrepreneurship to the average person, right? What conjures up in their mind? It's, Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or all these kind of tech bro people that emerge from places in California and sort of suck all the oxygen out of the room. But you make the point that entrepreneurship is a much richer, deeper, more widespread phenomena that we should be thinking more broadly about. So maybe start there.
Well, it's great to be here, Rita. Thanks for having me. Entrepreneurship is much bigger and broader than the celebrity entrepreneurs that really get all of the attention in the media. And in my role at Venture Lab, working with students across 12 different schools at Penn, they need role models. Role models matter for them. And the book was done to provide a bunch of role models that are taking different entrepreneurial paths and to distill some principles that can inspire anyone who wants to be entrepreneurial.
I love that. And one of the things that is sort of interesting about the book is you start off with what you call your 6 R's that lead these entrepreneurs to be unstoppable. Maybe go through those. You got reason, recombination, relationships, resources, resilience, and results. And then you take each of these entrepreneurial stories and sort of show how those principles show up in their stories. What led you to those 6?
Each of them, they're really interconnected and correlated. It's not like each is an orthogonal dimension. But let's start with reason, which is the first one that we tend to focus on. And across our stories, some of the entrepreneurs had a really strong motivating passion from square one. Katlyn wants to empower young women since she's been in middle school, or Jarrid wants to promote more underrepresented minorities in the venture capital and entrepreneurial ecosystem. And he's an underrepresented minority himself. So some people come in with that really strong passion from square one and keep refining until they find a way to have a successful business around it. And then about the other half say, I just want to be an entrepreneur. These are the people who tell you they were selling candy in middle school and got suspended for taking their Halloween candy in and the like. And so those folks are wanting to have their own business and do something that allows them to have a lot of control and have influence, but they do a search until they can really find something that can ultimately become their passion. This is Amy disrupting the hair color market. She didn't, as a little girl, say, I want to grow up and be a hair color entrepreneur.
So I think that idea of having a motivating force for starting a business is just super interesting. You know, as you know, one of the things Mac and I used to study was these habitual entrepreneurs, people who started multiple businesses. And one of the things I would observe about those guys is they kind of fall into your second bucket, right? I don't know what I want to do, but I want to be my own boss. I want to do my own thing. And they almost have like an inventory of ideas. And when the situation's right and it all comes together, then they'll actually go. But they don't have a particular thing they're trying to solve. They have a sort of shape of businesses that they're looking after.
And you know, those serial entrepreneurs, this allows us to hit a couple of other R's pretty quickly. They developed a store of resources and relationships that help ideas to come to them, help them to recognize ideas that somebody starting off from scratch wouldn't be able to see as easily.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really, really interesting. So then you've got recombination. And I think this is another thing that a lot of folks get wrong about entrepreneurship, which is, you know, they think it's brand new, out of the lab. It's never been seen or done before. When, as you point out, most businesses are kind of new ways of organizing things, most of which already existed before that business came into being.
Absolutely. In all of our stories, you see echoes of people's experiences career-wise or culturally where they've grown up that help them to recognize opportunities. And if we just jump from that, we'll talk about examples in a minute, but if you jump from that into the straight up research, Brian Utsi has done some wonderful research looking at which scientific papers have the most impact. And he shows the same sort of phenomenon about recombination. Papers that are most impactful, 90% of their citations go to the incremental basic results that we already know in the field. But those that have about 10% of infusion of papers and ideas from other areas, those are the ones that are more impactful. So there's this sweet spot. Something can be too innovative and new and never get any commercial success, but having a little bit of unique combination of experiences tends to be a real spur and seed for innovation.
I love that. And the connection with academic papers is really interesting because what makes a paper interesting is that it challenges weakly held assumptions. So it's that little bit of extra on top of, hey, you used to think it was that, but actually it's a little bit this. But if you challenge strongly held assumptions, now you're in the domain of heresy and nobody wants to hear what you have to say.
Exactly.
So what made you choose the title Unstoppable Entrepreneurs? And I think this gets to your idea about resilience and results, right? That they don't try something, face a setback and give up. They sort of work at it.
Absolutely. Frequently, we see these success stories in the media that ex post are told as I recognized an opportunity and it took off and here I am. Or you might hear, we pivoted a couple of times, but you don't hear all of the psychological baggage around how difficult it can be to be an entrepreneur and to face negative feedback and to be worried about running out of resources or to find that you've lost your best customer due to a factor completely out of your control. I lead a lot of panels with alumni at our different reunions and events, and our audiences are always the most captivated when entrepreneurs are telling the story of when it was hard and when they were resilient. So we put a lot of that, those issues that people grappled with, as well as some of the practices they use to keep themselves grounded. So there's wisdom from each of these entrepreneurs as well. But I thought Unstoppable Entrepreneurs was a way cooler title than Resilient Entrepreneurs.
I think you're right. I think much more commercial, much more. So maybe tell a couple of stories about, you know, some of the folks you feature in the book, and you talk about. What I also liked about the book is in addition to the R's, which is kind of the ingredients, the cut across, but you've got these different patterns of ways people can engage in the entrepreneurial process. And let's start maybe with disrupting.
Sure. It is a major theme of the book that there's not a one size fits all path. Again, despite the media stereotype of these massive disruptors, there are 7 different paths, and each of them provide inspiration for different people. And indeed, many of the subjects in the book wind up following more than one path over time. But disruption, I love this example. We talk about Amy Errett, who is the CEO of Madison Reed. Madison Reed is a hair color company, direct to consumer, and now, of course, it's omni-channel. Amy is fabulous. She's decidedly not a tech bro, but she's creating a unicorn in this space. She had trouble getting funding at first because the venture capitalists didn't think a woman's business in hair color was quite as lucrative as an analog would be Dollar Shave Club, right? It's a subscription business. So she struggled at first to really get buy-in from folks, but she had enough relationships and had worked a bit in VC. She saw the patterns, she saw this opportunity and ran with it. And at this point, she has built out not only the direct-to-consumer hair color and all of the complementary products and things like the brush and all of that. But then she has started selling to big box stores. So she's also distributing through Ulta and Walmart and Target and the like. She's going through Amazon, and she's built at this point over 100 hair color bars. So if you know Dry Bar, if you've gone to get your hair blown out, usually if you see a Dry Bar somewhere in that same big box complex, you'll see a Madison Reed where you can go and get your hair colored very quickly and with fine, high quality products, and then go to Dry Bar and get it blown out. But so she's created something that's essentially a unicorn at this point. The last time I looked at Pitch Book, I think it was 89% likelihood of successful exit on that.
Good for her. That's
amazing.
And that started at Wharton. Did she start that at Wharton?
No. She was more experienced, but she's a very involved alumna with us. So she comes back and speaks to students and the like. She did her executive MBA at Wharton. And so that was an important part of her background. And she just really found the right sweet spot in the market to disrupt, because previously, you either went to a salon and spent several $100s to get your hair colored and cared for, or you bought an $8 to $10 box of very smelly chemical stuff at the drugstore and went home and got your bathroom all dirty doing your own home hair color. And she found that middle space to start her disruption, where she had something that was about a $25 price point, get a beautiful box at home, and it's high quality ingredients like you would get at the salon. So this is chugging along very nicely. And then COVID happens and nobody can go to the salon. And she starts selling a box of hair color every 4 seconds. So wow. It's an amazing story.
That would have been a real accelerant, of course. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And then you got bootstrappers.
Yeah. More than 80% of enterprises are bootstrapped, right? They're not taking equity or debt funding. People are working with their own resources in business spaces that don't require a ton of funding to get started. But this is a quieter path. We certainly encourage all of our students at Venture Lab to not take funding as long as they can, to bootstrap as long as they can to maintain their equity. But this is a story that needs to be sung a bit more. And our entrepreneur there is Jesse Pujji. He founded a company called Ampush. It was a digital marketing company. He was one of those folks who got in trouble for selling candy in middle school and was looking with his 2 business partners for a business. They found their way into digital marketing. Were one of the first people in when Facebook opened up their API. So they started advising tech companies on their digital spends on social media. He built out this company, all bootstrapped. The only time they ever took an investment was to cash out to some of the equity. And he wound up selling this company for 8 figures. So that's a massive life-changing outcome when you're not diluted through many, many investors. And now he is the CEO of, he calls it a studio holding company, Gateway X, where he is building out with a set of CEOs, a portfolio of businesses that cater to different customers who need this digital marketing expertise. I'll tell you about some of them, but let me stop here for a moment. I want it to be a conversation with you.
Oh, of course, yeah. I'd love to hear more. So, but I think to reinforce the point that you make, which is, it's not all about Facebook and venture capital and, be Uber and get to be a megalithic corporation, that the bulk of startups really are, what do we call them? Friends, family, and fools that put some money into something they think is promising. And if you can avoid being, having investors involved, that gives you much more degrees of freedom, buys you more time. Plus, I find once people own your company, they sort of think they have the right to tell you what to do, and that may go completely against what your desires are as an entrepreneur. So I think bootstrapping is a really attractive path in many cases.
Yeah, and that brings up another issue. We're operating in worlds where most of the people we're interacting with are looking to do high growth entrepreneurship, but there is lots and lots and lots. The vast majority of enterprise and entrepreneurship is small business, is more lifestyle entrepreneurship. There are 31 million enterprises in the US. 29 million of them are sole proprietorships. Okay, this is the guy who's coming to mow my lawn, right?
Wow.
Only about 0.5% take venture funding. So this is a very, very small set of them. Only about 1% are more than 500 people. These numbers are going to start to change with AI, of course. But bootstrapping is the way that many, many, many entrepreneurs, and we think about the small businesses, winds up operating. And the book is also about inspiring people in those domains as well. Wherever you are, you can see something entrepreneurial to do. You can see a way to innovate and create value. And wherever you are in your journey, you can probably build and grow that a little bit more.
I love that. Well, and I think one of the really interesting things to me about being your own boss, as it were, is so many people that work for large corporations are not happy. They're stressed out, they're disengaged, they're sort of working for the men. And I think one of the nice things about your book is you sort of lay out that it doesn't have to be that way. You can envision situations in which you could call your own shots, in which you could do something where you can use your own ingenuity and creativity, and it doesn't have to be high risk. That's the other thing. I think we read the stories about entrepreneurial failure, and sure, the odds are not in your favor of becoming the next DuPont or something, but it's very possible to create a portfolio career where, maybe you've got 3 or 4 different business relationships that you're running. And I see more and more. And one of the things I'm intrigued by, apart from what's in your book, is I think we are on the brink of needing to rethink social institutions, most of which were embedded in this notion, the post-World War II notion of big corporations where your healthcare and your pension and your insurance, all this stuff was tied to that long-term fixed employment relationship. And I think we need a whole new set of social institutions to deal with portfolio careers, startups, people that are doing their own things, people that have the equivalent of 3 jobs, but they're all part-time jobs, but they're very stable. They're delivering value, but they're not their own thing. Anyway, I just think we need to.
There's a lot to unpack there. I want to put in a throwaway line and then talk about intrapreneurship. But the throwaway line for right now is that risk is not one of my R's. So we'll come back to that separately. But intrapreneurship is one of the pathways that I do cover in the book. And the fact that 70% of all innovations are still developed in established corporations. That's a statistic from Kay and Krippendorf. I'm sure you know him. This is very common, but it's not usually the way we think of entrepreneurial activity because it's happening in companies. This isn't someone who's gone and started their own business per se. My intrapreneur is Jackie Reeses. She was a banker for many years, and she winds up moving to the West Coast and going into tech. She's at Square, and Square at the time is making the little white Square point of sale terminals. Because Jackie was a banker, this gets back to recombination, because she was a banker, she saw that all the data that Square was collecting through these terminals could be used to assess whether an entrepreneur, a small business entrepreneur, was a good candidate for a small loan. She decides to build a bank within Square. This sounds reasonable enough, but it's actually super, super hard to get a bank charter if you're not already in that space. And she spends her 5 or 6 years at Square essentially building out what became Square Financial Services. So she's doing this on Jack Dorsey's dime, right? She's not doing this independently as an entrepreneur per se, but it's incredibly entrepreneurial activity.
Oh, it is.
And postscript, she leaves after the charter is granted. Great story of resilience there too. And then she goes and acquires a traditional bank in Kansas City in the Midwest. It's called Lead Bank. It's now called Lead. And along with 2 other coworkers from Square, they all leave and they wind up acquiring Lead. And they've turned this into a bank that is providing incredible services for fintechs. Because she understands what fintechs need. And they've been recognized by CNBC disruptors and the like. So many things to unpack there. She's done multiple pathways over time, the intrapreneur, the acquirer, now the disruptor. But also she could see those activities because of the previous experiences she had. So less risky in her view than in an outsider's point of view.
Absolutely. And I love the point about entrepreneurs. So that's where I spend a lot of my life, right? Which is trying to innovate. And one of the sort of interesting phenomena there is, I think it was William Baumol years ago, the economist, who basically said the magic of capitalism is that it's like an innovation arms race. And a lot of, it pushes companies to innovate, whether they want to or not. And I think the entrepreneur really plays a pivotal role there.
I think it's been so interesting for each of us over the span of careers that are now more than 30 years. And I should say, we take so much Wharton pride in the thought leadership you've been putting out there, because since you're a Wharton alum, we still take credit for it, even though you've been affiliated with Columbia for all of these years.
Oh, my PhD will always be from Wharton.
Exactly. We've really seen a transition in how innovation takes place. To your earlier point about the post-World War II corporations, the big research labs. I worked at Bell Labs for a while. What's Bell Labs now? It's the setting. If you've watched Severance on Apple TV, that's the Bell Labs building where I used to work. It's an Euro-Saarinen building. And they film a TV show there because it's become a co-working space. Bell Labs is a shadow of its former self, and it's been acquired by another company at this point.
It's part of Nokia now. So here's the interesting thing to me about all that whole thing was, so everybody now thinks Nokia is dead, it's gone, and that's not true. What they have done is they basically exited most of their consumer markets, but they're
in infrastructure. Yeah,
they bought Alcatel, they bought Bell Labs. They have a whole series of things that they're doing around networking infrastructure, and they're actually quite a healthy company these days. It's just they don't have that consumer brand anymore.
Absolutely, and the shift toward much more strategic acquisition of assets and less the all-purpose research lab. And when I was at Bell Laboratories way back when, only for a few years, but this is in the 80s, they had just gone through divestiture, so they were just starting to have to compete. Prior to that, they were in a cost-up world. They told the government how much it cost to provide phone service to people, and then they added 12%. And this is what people paid for their bills. And if I wanted to talk from New Jersey to Palo Alto on the telephone for 3 hours, it would cost me $24.
Oh,
Right?
absolutely.
So that was a different world. But with the dismantling of that cost up structure, then of course you see much more emphasis on what's the immediate returns to R&D, and it being much more strategic and focused. I think the other big trend that we've seen is the with digitalization, the development of these ecosystems where the large tech giants continue to consume all of the startups in order to integrate them into their ecosystem. So some of the innovation is taking place in-house, and the rest of it is being acqui-hired
Right.
and the like.
Absolutely. That's a huge trend, a
Yeah.
huge. And it's interesting the role that antitrust plays in that too, because, under Biden, there was a lot more likely resistance to that. I suspect that's going to change, but that's another
Yeah.
topic.
Time
So
will tell. Yes.
let's talk about social entrepreneurs. That was a big theme, when I was at Wharton, even for years. Macmillan and Jim Thompson and all those guys were really interested in studying these people who, yes, they want to make money, but they also want to attack some serious social issue.
Yeah. We've seen such interesting dynamics with our students and that term at Wharton. If you ask students, are you a social entrepreneur? Maybe 1 in 7 of the students that work with our programs would claim that label. But other students are very reticent to claim that label because they perceive it as not being focused enough on profitability. And nothing could be further from the truth, because when you talk to our whole set of students, 70% of them will identify impact goals within their companies. So the new generation, I think, is much more thinking about purpose and passion and impact. But they don't necessarily term it that way. So it's a very interesting term right now. But the important thing is that it spans social entrepreneurship, spans everything from building a nonprofit to building extraordinarily successful enterprises that can be quite successful financially and at the same time change some aspect of society. Want me to give you an example from the book?
Sure.
I profiled Katlyn Grasso, and she is the CEO of GenHERation, but it looks like GenHER, H-E-R, Asian. And Katlyn knew from middle school she wanted to empower young girls and refined her ideas over the course of her undergraduate time at Wharton. And she received a prestigious university prize after graduation that helped her fund what she was running around 2015, 16. She called them Discovery Days bus tours. This was her prime product, where she'd get young women to pay for a ticket on the bus, and they'd go and visit over a span of several days all kinds of different companies. And the companies were interested in bringing these women in to expose them to different careers and the like. So Katlyn is building out this business. I mean, she's the best networker I know. She's incredibly dynamic. So this is humming along nicely. Her sister joins her after her sister graduates. Very small team. And then COVID. Suddenly you can't take anybody on a bus tour, and she has to turn it into virtual tours. And of course, this is what catapults her business as well, because once she is virtual, then she can Forex this business in no time and continue to grow it. And now she's an edtech. Right before, she was a social entrepreneur who was operating bus tours, and now she's a thriving edtech. Profitable, over 10 employees, lots of opportunities to scale her platform a lot further. So it's a fantastic story of doing something with real impact, but also being able to make a very, very handsome living off of it.
I love that. It reminds me that there are some companies that start not with the goal of making profits or having a successful exit, but with other goals in mind. So one that comes to mind is the company Shinola. I don't know if you know them. They were founded by a guy who was from Detroit, and with the sort of implosion of automobile manufacturing in Detroit, he said, "Hang on, there's all this incredible talent here. I mean, there are people who make who make car seats, and there are people who put the leather around the wheel, the steering wheel, and people who are just super adept at finding things." And so he founded this company, called it Shinola, had to buy the brand name. And the company is in the wildest assortment of stuff. It's in like luxury watches and bicycles and leather purses. And, like if you look at it through a classic business school portfolio lens, it makes absolute sense. But if you say, well, wait a minute, what this guy's trying to do is take this talent and figure out what products they could sell that would allow us to deploy this talent. And they've been incredibly successful. And they're premium products. They're absolutely beautiful. My husband, if he's looking for like a birthday present, he knows he can't go wrong with a little Shinola bag. It always works.
I didn't know they had such an extensive portfolio. I'm familiar with the watches, but this is another great recombination story because you're mixing and matching all of the talent that's there. But it's also, it really speaks to this issue of impact, because when we think about results, so much is focused on you became a billionaire because you are a celebrity entrepreneur that's featured in the media. But it's an incredibly important outcome to create jobs for a community.
Well, if you think about, I guess capitalism finds money easy to measure, right? But if you're thinking about what makes a great and vibrant society, there's a lot more to it. There's a very interesting not really a music album, a sort of a protest album that's making the rounds in England, and it's called "Is This What We Want?" And the album, I haven't heard it myself, but I'm told the album is like a recorded version of what happens to a recording studio when there's no music being made. So you'll hear a door opening, you'll hear a window opening and shut, you hear somebody walking down the hallway. And the reason I raise it is because culture has value, right? I meat, if all we did was sit in restaurants and pass money to one another, that would be a pretty empty way of living. And I think what entrepreneurs do is they bring us they bring us culture, they bring us different ways of looking at things, they bring us beautiful craftsmanship, and those things have value that goes beyond just what money will account for. So I think it's an interesting dilemma that we kind of swung way over on the money is everything cut front and have not paid enough attention to some of these other dimensions.
And I think that whole idea is so relevant at this moment in particular, as we're seeing so many of the entry-level jobs have the specter of being essentially eliminated by AI. When my students give me homework assignments, I tell them I do not want a homework assignment with no soul. Don't just use an LLM to generate the same answer from all 60 of you. You have to put that creative spark onto it in order to, that bit of novelty is going to be what makes you stand out. If everybody can generate the exact same outcome, it's no longer interesting.
Well, that's true. Absolutely. And that's interesting. So I want to touch on the models, but then I'd love to talk about what you're doing at the Venture Lab and how, how that kind of fits into the bigger thing. So you talk about technology commercialization as a path.
Yes.
This is the drug company, right?
Yes. And a technology commercializer is a person who can recognize that some technology exists in some form. It's probably a patented or residing within a company that hasn't gotten much traction yet. And technology commercializer knows a way or figures out a way to get that into the hands of customers that need it. So that's how they're creating value. The story I tell is Joan Lau, and she calls herself an accidental entrepreneur because she was happily working as a neuroscientist at Merck for many years. And well, I won't say fully happily, because she did tell me that she was worried about whether the pills were being distributed in 2-packs or 4-packs, and that would be a long corporate meeting. So she knew there was more. But she never had imagined herself as an entrepreneur, but she started to say, I want to do things that are life-changing. I want to capture the value from the products that I'm creating. And she wound up joining forces with another person local to the Philadelphia area. They now invest in small biotechs. Joan wound up becoming the CEO of a biotech right now that's working on a cure for cystic fibrosis. Right now, that's a life-changing outcome. And Joan she didn't invent this potential cure, but she has enough expertise to be able to recognize its potential. And of course, the timing of that sort of segment takes so long to get through all of the approvals that it'll be a while before it's able to be commercially available, but that will be a life-changing outcome. So that's a technology commercializer. And quite a few of the students who are here at Penn, particularly those who come from the engineering or science background, have some ideas that are rooted in technology, and they'll frequently join forces with the Wharton students for the commercialization skills as well.
I love that combination. We have something like that in Columbia as well, where we have a startup lab, and a lot of those teams are actually business school students, engineering students, and then they'll throw in the occasional like arts and science major for the kind of culture and communication part. It's interesting to see how those skill sets come together.
Yeah, at Penn we have a graduate school of education, and they actually have a fantastic education entrepreneurship program. So many of the folks who will raise their hands and use that social entrepreneurship label are building something in service of educating, locally, nationally, globally.
Really interesting. Really interesting. Then you have your funder, right? And this is kind of a combination of funding and social entrepreneurship, right?
My example is yes, but there are many Wharton and Penn alumni who have founded investing firms, whether they're venture capital firms or private equity firms. Much of the alternative investment industry, Penn would like to take credit for it having been invented by our alumni, Wharton and beyond. But these folks are frequently just seen as investors as opposed to entrepreneurs. And starting up a fund from scratch is actually a very entrepreneurial activity. You're building those relationships in order to amass the resources, the funds, and then you need to be able to perform the outreach to get a great deal flow and construct a useful portfolio. The example I have in the book is Jarrid Tingle, who is Harlem Capital. And he had been working in banking and private equity. And as an African American, he was very frustrated that many underrepresented minorities or diverse entrepreneurs he felt were not getting the same access to funding. And there's research that bears out the small percentage of funding that women and underrepresented minorities get of VC dollars. It's usually about 2% for each of those groups. And so he felt that money was being left on the table and wound up partnering with a colleague and building Harlem Capital. And it has a social mission, as you say. They want to train 1,000 diverse entrepreneurs. They look forward to ringing the bell at NASDAQ with several of those entrepreneurs. But because of this mission, not only do they do the typical things that you would expect of a earlier stage VC firm, but they're also building community among their entrepreneurs. Now, to be clear, anyone is welcome. It's not only underrepresented minority entrepreneurs, but they're building community. They have something called culture carry, where their carry is 1% of it is distributed amongst all of the founders, so that there's encouragement for them to help each other and come together, as opposed to being autonomous portfolio firms, which is just really lovely. And the best statistic that he cites right now is that of all of the diverse folks in venture capital, they believe 1 of 9 has gone through some sort of internship opportunity at Harlem Capital. So they're really trying to change the face of that sector.
That's fabulous. That's really fabulous. And then we come to the last category that you mentioned, which is acquirers. And I personally related to this a lot because my daughter-in-law is actually now the CEO of a firm that she bought through a search fund. And I it's not very well understood what this is. So maybe if you could explain what search funds do, and then how that fits into the whole entrepreneurial picture.
Absolutely. We have a whole program in entrepreneurship through acquisition, and more of the schools with entrepreneurial centers are developing this, because this is an incredible opportunity to take a small business, acquire it, and then build it into something bigger and better. That's creating jobs and giving a boost to our economy. Traditionally, this was the purview of someone who came from family money, or someone who had easy access to money, not people who might not have that sort of a safety net. But the search fund vehicle allows them to raise funds to look for these sorts of businesses that have higher growth potential. And so entrepreneurs that acquire business have higher likelihoods of success, survival, and then higher future returns, because you can already do diligence on a concept and see how it's working, and then think about how you can modernize it. The example in the book is Charbel Drake, who acquired a data communications business that was putting Wi-Fi into hotels and upgrading it and servicing it. And he was able to 3x that business in a short period of time. And then his investors from the search fund make money. He was also able to get a nice return. But there are so many interesting examples. We have a couple of our alums who are in funeral services. There are a lot of older generation folks who have funeral homes, and their kids don't want to inherit and run a funeral home. And it turns out that since most are family owned, there are a lot of ways to develop something that's much more scalable. And so that they're well on their way on that front. And you can imagine how many mom and pop businesses might fit into that kind of model.
Yeah, so just to explain what a search fund is. So these are funds that are, people with capital to invest will stake out a small claim. It's not as big as like a typical private equity fund or something like that.
Correct.
Well, it's like a small scale version of that. And what
Yes.
they'll often do is, at least the one that I'm familiar with, they'll take alumni or students and they'll put them through kind of a training program and a searching program. And then when they find a company that seems like a likely fit, they will negotiate the sale and the terms, and then the student gets put in charge as a senior executive or the CEO, and then they benefit from the growth in value of the firm. The investors eventually get paid back. Eventually, if all goes well, the student takes over, and it becomes a healthy, thriving, scalable business. And it's a really interesting model to me, because there, as you said, there's so many of these little firms where the children have all gone off to be doctors and lawyers or whatever, right. and yet it's a solid little business that is looking for a home. So it's,
right, by rolling up a lot of these solid little businesses, you can create a much more massive enterprise. Interestingly, we have students involved in ETA, everything from undergraduates through our more experienced graduate students. We see tons of interest from veterans. Wharton actually has a nice veteran population in our MBA group. And I think these are people who say, I've already run large scale projects in the military. And so I have the skill set and the bearing to be seen as a CEO right away. Undergrads can be interested in the phenomenon. It's a little harder to convince people that you're going to be an awesome CEO when you're 22 years old. But again, they're getting that knowledge. And many of the graduates of Wharton do not become entrepreneurs right away, but rather they go into interesting stuff and learn a space. They learn a sector, and that's what helps them to see opportunity. So many of our stories are like Amy Errett's, where we were earlier, where she came to the entrepreneurship. She came to Madison Reed after a few other small businesses, but also a spell as a venture capitalist.
Interesting. Well, there's, unlike the popular imagination, their research suggests most entrepreneurs are older. That they're not 22-year-olds. They've had a lot of experience, which makes a lot of sense. I mean, where else do you learn this stuff, right?
Right.
So let's talk about what you're doing at the Venture Lab and what are some of the programs you're running. And I'd love to get your take on how AI is going to have an impact on what we're seeing in the startup world, what we think is going to happen to these entry-level jobs. I mean, it's a brave new frontier out there.
Yeah. Let me put a pin on the Venture Lab piece and just go back to the comment you just made about older entrepreneurs. Snapchat is a very uncommon sort of thing where you have a very young person with a very small firm getting acquired for billions and billions of dollars. The vast majority of even venture capital backed firms are founded by older folks. My colleague Danny Kim, a professor in the management department here, looked at the top point, like 0.001% of venture capital backed firms. So these are very, very strong firms. And the average age of the founder was late 30s, early 40s. And I think you're going to see even more of that happening now because of all the job dislocation that's happening right now. Job dislocation is just such a massive impetus for someone to form a business and strike out on their own. And so I think this is a moment where you're going to see even more efforts on that front. Mm-hmm. All right, so let's talk about Venture Lab. I love my job here because I get to observe and interact with so many amazing students who have so many amazing ideas that they'd like to pursue. We have over close to 4,000 students who are members of our Venture Lab. I'm sitting here in Tangen Hall. We built a beautiful new building since you've been here. It's 67,000 square feet of student entrepreneurship space with maker spaces, test kitchen, lots of team rooms and the like. And all of these students have registered well over 500 venture ideas with us. And the most promising ones, we have all sorts of workshops and mentorship and one-on-one advising and cash awards, non-dilutive awards to help them move their ventures along a funnel. We have an incubator, an accelerator. I use that term it's our accelerator that's getting students ready for the external market. So they might go to YC after our accelerator in some cases, but it's not just the ventures. We have students who are joining those ventures, so they're jumping into the funnel. We have students who are investing by helping us to distribute the awards that we have by doing diligence. We have students who are advising. We have students who are building digital assets. So we're building out an ecosystem here that's developing lots of great venture ideas. I have to say 2 words, Warby Parker at this moment, because Warby Parker is one of our most well-known successes that actually was built through Venture Lab, but we are it's just such an exciting place to be. And then we have so many alumni, not just of our actual Wharton entrepreneurial programs from way back when, but also people who've come to entrepreneurship later on and then come back to us to say, I want to give back and I want to help. So we were just creating this incredible flywheel here. It's so super exciting. It's such a joyful job.
Oh, it sounds wonderful. Do you keep in touch at all with the guys who founded Flatiron Health? Because that's a huge Wharton entrepreneurship success story.
Yeah. Nat Turner has been very involved with us, and right, it wasn't his original Wharton story. That was Invite Media, and then he subsequently founded Flatiron Health, which grew to be way bigger, and it was subsequently acquired. And now, last I spoke to him, he's doing interesting things in collectibles. So this is the sort of person who just wants to find new entrepreneurial things that are fun and interesting, exciting.
That's great. That's really exciting. So you do both undergraduate and MBAs, right? And exec MBAs, the whole gamut.
We even do high schoolers these days, and then online across the globe. So yeah, it's a wide spectrum these days. Yes.
Yeah, just for our listeners, one of the things that makes Wharton unusual among the top tier business schools is they do have a big and thriving undergraduate business program. Most of the other schools don't. So I think it is a differentiator at Wharton.
In my previous role, I actually served as the vice dean of the undergraduate program, and these are incredible students. As you say, it's a differentiator because if someone at 17 years old knows that they want to study business, they really, really, really want to come to the Wharton School because the other elite schools don't have a full-blown undergraduate program. So we get an incredible set of students there. They're very hardworking. They're very motivated. It's always the joke that when we have classes where MBAs and undergrads are allowed to enroll simultaneously, that the undergrads outperform the MBAs because they're more serious about their grades and they're brilliant.
Isn't that something? Wow.
Yeah.
Do you want to tackle AI for a minute? Because I'd be fascinated in your perspective on how that's going to influence entry-level jobs, how we train people, the impact on education. I've been talking to some folks who are experimenting with using AI in various educational things, and There are places where AI is actually better than a human. It's infinitely
Mhm.
patient. If you need to repeat the example 4,000 times, it's happy to do it.
More patient, yes, yes.
um, and then, of course, there are places where it's not so great, like you get 60 of the same essay. So what are some of the things you think are going to be important as AI sort of rolls out into our lives?
Well, yeah, I think like 30,000-foot view, we don't know how exactly this is going to turn out or who exactly is going to win, but we can recognize some of the same innovation patterns that we saw with the rise of the internet and the like. We have a stack where at the bottom of the stack, we're seeing data and models will soon, if not already, be commoditized. Only a small number of firms will control that. And there's a whole host of applications being built on top of the stack right now. And those are all over the place because everyone's trying to figure out, as you said, what works and what doesn't work. Just in the digital marketing space alone, I probably talked to 10 different alumni who are building out different sorts of apps. And what we know in a new S-curve, a new innovation regime, is that at some point there is going to be a shakeout. A small number of firms are going to survive as they consolidate into some recognizable apps that are used and scaled by many. So we know that dynamic is still going to happen. But then the question is, which ones, right? That's what everybody asks, and that's what's hard to predict right now. I think that the variety of use cases is so dramatic that this is a moment for every entrepreneur and every company to say, how much of our resources can we devote to experimenting so that we have enough capability? I mean, you're the real options person, Rita. So you should be saying this instead of me, but to have enough foot in the door so that as we start to see the way that the market is evolving, we're in step with it and we're not caught flat-footed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm seeing some folks that are, as with any big innovation, right? You've got the people that are in total denial it's going to change anything, all the way through to the people that are, probably equally mistakenly saying it's going to change everything. Nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I think to me the analogy I would use, if you've said, history rhymes, right, would be when we had the sort of 1995, call it, to 2001.com. I mean,
Yep.
I don't know about you, but it was hell being an entrepreneurship professor back then, because you would say, be frugal, conserve your resources, bootstrap. And our students would come in and say, I've got a business model. I've got $1 million in funding. What are you trying to teach me? It was very depressing back in the day, because I was still teaching in our MBA program back then, and in the entrepreneurship part of it. And then we had the dot-com crash, and there were people, believe it or not, who were saying, "Oh well, that internet fad, that's gone, that's done, that's the way of all history," because these things do have that shape, right? You have this huge bubble, and then it crashed, and then it takes a while before people say, "Well, what is the real economic proposition here?" And in the case of the dot-coms, so the crash was 2001. By the way, I wrote a book so the crash happened in March. The NASDAQ reached its high for that time period in March of that year. My book came out I think in August of that year, and it was called The Entrepreneurial Mindset.
Yes, with Mac, sure.
You don't want to publish a book in 2001 with the word entrepreneurial in the title. So that book kind of vanished without a trace, which was very depressing. But anyway, but then sort of 2002, 2003, Amazon by then had gotten sort of through its early growing pains. eBay was a thing. You started to see the first of these genuine e-commerce companies in Web 2.0. And I think we're going to see the same thing with AI. I think
yes, that consolidation. I completely agree.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what yet. I don't know what the killer app is going to be yet. But there's lots of experimentation going on to sort of figure
exactly. Well, speaking of books, here's what's on my shelf still. So there's for listeners, Seeing Around Corners, which is a really excellent book, which again speaks to that idea that risk isn't really one of the R's in my book, because good entrepreneurs are anticipating and doing the legwork, having the set of experiences that allows them to have a different risk profile, in essence.
Well, and what I've argued for years is that, if you use the right tools, if you use the right approach, you don't take on huge risks. I mean, everybody thinks, oh, entrepreneurs are risk takers. They're not.
Correct.
They take it step by step, and at each
Mhm.
step they learn, and then they pay a lot of attention to what assumptions are bearing out and which ones aren't. And then the ones that aren't, they adjust, they'll redirect.
Mhm.
So they don't at any given moment tend to expose themselves very highly to big downsides. You just don't see that.
Yeah. Here's a great example from one of my stories. So Amy Errett, we talked about Madison Reed really growing and building out all these stores. She had about 12 stores before the pandemic. And then everything closed down and nobody was going to stores. She had to take the people who worked in stores and train them to take computer orders so that they would have different sorts of jobs as women were all coloring their hair at home. She wanted to open more stores and wanted to buy up leases. Because things were at rock bottom prices during the pandemic. And she had more investors coming to her who said, don't do that. We want to invest in you, but we don't want you opening more stores. And she said, you know what? I see what's going on here. I see all these women who've historically spent all this money to color their hair, learning how to do it at home with my fabulous product. And they're just going to want to come to a salon and use my my fabulous product. Once we're able to come back out again. And she snapped up about 75 leases at rock bottom prices and now has over 100 stores. And they've been incredibly successful, but she could see it, but nobody else could see it because of her understanding her customer in a way that nobody else could.
And I think that's a real theme, which is this deep, rich understanding of what the job the customer is trying to get done. And so what are your plans for promoting the book? Are you going visiting places? Are you having signings? What are you doing with it?
So the book comes out April 22nd. So we're
available for pre-order. So the book is Unstoppable Entrepreneurs, Wharton Business School Press, and we encourage people to pre-order it. It's a really fun read.
Yes, it's available wherever you like to get your books. It's interesting these days, there's less of the tour around the country signing books and much more of the podcast sorts of appearances like this. So that schedule is getting pretty full. I know my team is booking me for some alumni events in New York and San Francisco and Chicago. And I'm sure we'll have complimentary events so open to the public as well on that front. But it is such an exciting time. It's actually my first book, and it's an exciting time because it has the potential to have such a wide readership. It's not just these high growth entrepreneurs that could be interesting. I think there's inspiration in the book for anyone who wants to be a little bit more entrepreneurial, whether they're working at a company right now and thinking what they can do there, or whether they're hoping to start their own business, or whether they already have one and are looking to grow it. So it is more general purpose than many of the academic business books.
It absolutely is. And what I love about it is how practical it is, that and this is another theme, right? You think taking a corporate job is this sort of safer option because you get a regular paycheck and, health benefits or whatever. But I think what we're learning in today's environment is it's not, some toxic boss halfway up the hierarchy can decide to fire the left-hand side of the building. And, you're kind of at their mercy if you're in that role. And yet if you run your own business, if you call your own shots, if you play it right, it can be much more empowering, and you can then create the kind of environment that you want to live in. And I think that's such a great message.
Yeah. And back to our earlier discussion on AI, the sorts of jobs that students coming out of a place like Wharton or a place like Penn would traditionally take in finance, in consulting, they're going to change dramatically, and they're likely going to be fewer of them because much of that work is at risk of being automated. I mean, legal, for goodness sake. Not so many Wharton students go into law, but nonetheless, those are areas where the entry-level job picture is going to change a great deal. So I think you're going to see more and more people saying, where can I see an opportunity and push on it, whether that's within a company or on their own. And the book is meant to inspire that kind of thinking.
Well, I have really enjoyed this conversation. We're going to have to get you to New York. Maybe you do a book thing up at Columbia. We can take you to Soho. We have a very cool startup lab there. And I'll have to show you the new buildings.
Yes.
But anyway, so my guest has been Lori Rosenkopf, professor at the Wharton School, head of their venture lab, and author of the forthcoming book, Unstoppable Entrepreneurs, which is now available for pre-order. Keep your eyes open for it. Lori, thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Rita, it's been fabulous to catch up with you, and congrats on all your success over the years. And I'll look forward to crossing paths again soon.